Hello all. Today I'd like to talk about two snooty British men. The first is Neville Chamberlain, the notoriously short-sighted Prime Minister of Great Britain at the end of the 1930s. The second is the current Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, a man who wants to be Prime Minister. If he succeeds, I think he'll be remembered for being just as short-sighted as Chamberlain was. Neville Chamberlain gets trotted out a lot as a deeply inappropriate example. In this instance, however, I think it's appropriate to say Boris Johnson could very well be a 21st century Neville Chamberlain. Let me explain. Neville Chamberlain was the British Prime Minister from 1937 to 1940. He is rightly remembered as a tremendous fuck-up. The most important thing happening in Europe in the late 1930s was the rise of a Chancellor of Germany named Adolf Hitler. Hitler had remilitarized Germany in violation of the treaty ending World War I, and in March 1938, he swallowed up Austria. His next step was to start threatening Czechoslovakia, using its large population of ethnic Germans as an excuse. In September of 1938, Chamberlain started flying back and forth to meet with Hitler to resolve the question. In Munich, he basically gave Hitler everything. He allowed Hitler to take the German areas of Czechoslovakia, some of the best fortified areas of Europe, without firing a shot.
The settlement of the Czechoslovakian problem, which has now been achieved, is, in my view, only the prelude to a larger settlement in which all Europe may find peace.
He claimed that he had achieved peace for our time, but in fact, that peace lasted barely a year. When World War II started in 1939, Hitler was in a dramatically better position than he would have been if he'd had to fight his way through Czechoslovakia. Chamberlain's policy of appeasement is rightly reviled. It's a way overused example, though. Western politicians, and especially US politicians, love talking about every foreign policy issue in terms of Chamberlain and appeasement. As I've covered elsewhere, this is deeply silly. Saddam Hussein was no Hitler, and Vladimir Putin certainly isn't either. What's worth remembering about Neville Chamberlain isn't the appeasement policy he used, but his incredible short-sightedness. His inability to see beyond his personal popularity with a war-weary public is what led him to make his cowardly deal with Hitler. In doing so, he broke the most fundamental rule of UK history. The British Isles can never avoid Europe and its problems. If they try, they end up suffering for it. I see exactly the same sort of short-sightedness in the career of a modern British politician.
Raindrops keep falling on my head.
Boris Johnson is the popular mayor of London and a member of parliament from the Conservative Party. He's goofy, charming, and one of the most well-liked politicians in Britain. In recent months, he's broken with the Conservative Prime Minister to support Britain's exit from the European Union. The UK will be voting on this exit, commonly known as Brexit, in a referendum on June 23rd. Johnson claims to be supporting Brexit out of high principles, but he's also made a pretty crass political calculation. If Britain votes to leave the EU in June, the conservative but pro-EU British Prime Minister David Cameron will probably resign. That would make Boris the likely next leader of the Conservative Party and probably Prime Minister. Like Chamberlain, he is putting his political career above the country's best interest. He's also breaking that fundamental rule of British history I was talking about earlier. From William the Conqueror down through Henry V, Marlborough, Wellington, and Winston Churchill, the facts are pretty clear. Britain has no choice but to be involved in Europe. This involvement started out through greed, but it's now simply a matter of self-preservation. For most of this history, this meant British soldiers dying in places like Waterloo and the banks of the River Somme. For the past 43 years, Britain has been able to send bureaucrats to make its voice heard in Europe rather than soldiers. The European Community, which became the European Union in the 1990s, has been the most important factor in keeping Europe out of the militarized anarchy that is its natural state. It's become very clear that the EU is a troubled institution, but it's also a vitally important one. If Boris Johnson gets what he wants, a prime ministership and a UK that abandons the EU in its time of greatest need, the consequences could be just as terrible as those that followed from Neville Chamberlain's short-sightedness. If the British opt for Brexit and choose to stop sending bureaucrats to Europe, they may find themselves sending soldiers again within the next few decades. And that's why Boris Johnson may be a 21st century Neville Chamberlain. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. And if you'd like to help me make more videos like this one, please click on the Patreon link here to find out how.